Rachel, wearing a stunning blue kimono, looked overwhelmed as she stood quietly like a wallflower at the party. Noticing her hesitation, I gently took her hand. It felt soft and delicate, like silk, and my heart skipped a beat at the touch. "If you'd like." My suggestion made Rachel pause, but after a moment, she nodded slightly. "My name is Ryan, and I'm 30 years old. I work for a small and medium-sized business that specializes in wholesale liquor distribution. We primarily handle sake, a type of Japanese alcohol brewed by local breweries. Tomorrow is the first major event I've planned and executed since joining this company mid-career. It's a large-scale sake tasting event. While the main guests are international buyers, the event has been widely advertised to locals and tourists alike, making it open to everyone. The event coincides with a local festival, drawing in crowds of not just locals but also international visitors. A reception party is being held today in anticipation of such an event tomorrow. The hotel ballroom is buzzing with invited foreign buyers and representatives from local breweries. We've ensured interpreters are available for all the international guests, allowing even the brewery owners who only speak Japanese to converse comfortably with the buyers. Feeling somewhat relieved by the friendly atmosphere, I scanned the room for any issues. That's when I noticed a beautiful woman in a kimono standing alone. It was Rachel, the daughter of the president of Irwin Brewery. Her appearance was captivating. The gradient of her kimono, transitioning from light blue near the neckline to a deep blue at the sleeves, was adorned with floral patterns that rippled like waves. Her beauty rivaled the elegance of her outfit. Her almond-shaped, double-lidded eyes were accented with perfectly applied shadow, and her straight nose complemented her soft pink lips. Her loosely pinned-up black hair swayed gently as she moved. Despite her stunning appearance, she stood there looking lonely and out of place. I hurried over to her. "Rachel, is everything okay? Are you feeling unwell?" When I asked, she slowly lifted her head, her forlorn gaze meeting mine, and murmured, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed by the atmosphere." Rachel gave a small, strained smile, but she looked tired. "Rachel, you look absolutely stunning in that kimono. It's such a shame for someone so beautiful to be a wallflower at this party." I tried to sound cheerful, but her expression didn't brighten. "Well, both my father and you encouraged me to give it a try, so I did my best. But I'm naturally shy, and even when someone talks to me, I struggle to respond properly, and then." Rachel hesitated, covering her mouth slightly as if unsure whether to continue. Finally, she frowned slightly and spoke. "Talking through an interpreter is just awkward." Since Rachel only speaks Japanese, she couldn't understand the foreign guests directly. Although the interpreter translated for her, she often hesitated over how to respond, leading to awkward pauses. And during the interpreter's translation of her reply, the silence felt unnatural to her. They talked a lot in English, but when it's translated into Japanese, it was so short. It makes me wonder if the interpreter is leaving something out. I start to get suspicious. "I'm sorry. I know it's just my imagination." Overthinking it all had left her exhausted, making her retreat into the background. "I'm sorry. This event is the result of all your hard work, and I can't even handle it properly." As she slumped in dejection, I smiled and extended my hand. Rachel tilted her head slightly in confusion. "In that case, why don't we go around together? I know a lot of people here, and I was planning to greet them anyway. Maybe having me with you will make it a bit easier." Rachel hesitated at my invitation. "But won't I just be in the way?" I firmly took her hand before she could refuse. Her soft touch made my heart race slightly. "Not at all. It would be an honor to accompany you." I flashed a bright smile and gently but confidently led her forward. Rachel silently followed me. Our first stop was to meet my French friend, Claude. "Claude. It's been a while. Thanks for coming." When I greeted him, Rachel visibly froze, her mouth agape in shock. She was surprised because I had spoken in French. Claude, unfazed by Rachel's reaction, gave me a big hug. He then turned to hug Rachel, but I quickly stopped him. No, Claude. Japanese women aren't used to physical contact like that, I said firmly, and Claude chuckled and replied in flawless Japanese, not hugging such a beautiful woman would be rude, don't you think? You're doing that on purpose. Even with his perfect Japanese, his reasoning wasn't convincing. I smiled awkwardly, translated the exchange for Rachel, and added that Claude was actually fluent in Japanese. Relieved, Rachel gave a small smile. Your best friend, a Frenchman? I didn't know you could speak French, Ryan. Scratching my head awkwardly, I replied. Well, there was never really a reason to mention it. I then turned to Claude with a serious expression. Claude, this is Rachel, the next president of Irwin Brewery, the company that once produced the legendary sake, Silver Summit. Claude's eyes widened, and Rachel looked equally surprised. What? Does Claude know about Silver Summit? It's been over 30 years since it was discontinued. Before I could respond, Claude suddenly embraced Rachel. Hey! Stop it, Claude. Let her go. I tried to pull him off, but his strength was impressive. Claude ignored me, holding Rachel tightly as he gushed. I can't believe it. Someone connected to the creators of that legendary sake. Finally, I managed to peel him off a very red-faced Rachel. Seeing her confusion, I decided to share a bit of my history with Claude. I explained that, due to my parents' work, I had moved around Europe as a child until I was in the first year of middle school. At first, I had a hard time understanding the language at all, especially when I was 10 and living in France. I struggled to learn French and felt lonely because I couldn't make friends. It was Claude who reached out to me during that time. He invited me to play ball games that didn't require much conversation, taught me French, and even learned Japanese from me in return. Thanks to him, I eventually made more friends and grew comfortable with the language. Today, French is one of the languages I'm most confident in. I owe Claude more than I can ever repay. And, as it turns out, Claude owes me as well. By pure coincidence, I had once helped his grandfather when I found him collapsed on the street. Although my French was still poor back then, I frantically called out to nearby adults for help, making a big scene. Luckily, thanks to the quick response, Claude's grandfather recovered without any lasting effects. From then on, Claude's family treated me and my parents with exceptional kindness. Then, 3 years ago, Claude suddenly came to Japan to visit me. He had come to tell me that his grandfather had passed away. Hearing that the funeral had been a small, family-only affair, I couldn't hold back my tears. Claude's grandfather had always been so kind. Every time I saw him, he would warmly smile and hand me a piece of candy. Even when I grew older and insisted, I'm not a kid anymore, he would still press the candy into my hand with the same cheerful smile. Knowing I'd never see that smile again was heartbreaking. At that moment, Claude handed me a bottle of sake. My grandfather bought this 30 years ago and treasured it. He wanted me to share it with you. Claude's grandfather had a passion for collecting alcohol from all over the world. Though he enjoyed drinking, he would carefully store rare and valuable bottles as part of his collection. He even had a custom storage facility to preserve each bottle's quality. Sake is known for its ability to age well, provided it's properly distilled and stored under optimal conditions. With careful barrel aging and temperature control, well-aged sake can develop rich and complex flavors over time, often earning a place on the menus of prestigious restaurants. I once had the privilege of sharing a bottle of treasured wine from his grandfather's collection during a meal with Claude's family. That red wine was rich and well-aged, but for someone used to cheaper drinks like me, it was a bit hard to appreciate. When I couldn't help but make a sour face, Claude's grandfather laughed and said, "You've still got a child's palate." Peeling away the paper wrapper designed to block light, the label Silver Summit appeared. I admired the simple calligraphy on the label as I carefully opened the bottle. The moment the cork was opened, the sweet aroma of sake wafted through the air, tickling my nose. With a gentle glug, glug, glug sound, the thick liquid poured smoothly into the tiny cup. Aged to perfection, it was no longer clear but a rich amber color. We raised our glasses together, honoring Claude's grandfather, and brought them to our lips. The moment I took a sip, a jolt shot through my mind. The taste was incredibly smooth, a gentle sweetness melted on my tongue, followed by a complex wave of acidity and a faint bitterness that filled my mouth, leaving a lingering sense of happiness even as it slid down my throat. Unlike fresh young sake, it didn't have a crisp lightness. I wondered what Silver Summit had tasted like when it was newly brewed. I froze in astonishment and glanced at Claude, who had his eyes closed, savoring the drink. A single tear glistened on his cheek. I wish I could have shared this with my grandfather. I nodded slowly, understanding the sentiment. When I finished recounting the story, Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. To think, our Silver Summit. I'm so happy, she managed to say, lowering her gaze. But I'm sorry, there are no plans to restart production. At her words, Claude's face fell, visibly filled with disappointment. Silver Summit was developed and crafted as a legacy project by Rachel's grandfather before his retirement, with the goal of creating a flagship sake for Irwin Distillery. He collaborated closely with trusted rice farmers to source large, high-quality rice, dedicating over 200 hours to meticulously milling and preparing the raw ingredients. While over-refining doesn't always guarantee a better sake, the precisely polished rice yielded a refined and sophisticated flavor. In the world of sake, spirits aged to perfection in carefully selected barrels, with attention to every detail of the production process, achieve the status of premium small batch or single barrel sake. At this stage, the sake is already considered high-end. However, Silver Summit was meticulously polished over 200 hours, achieving an astonishing polishing ratio of 20%. Born from countless trials and errors, Silver Summit was undoubtedly a masterpiece. But the high cost of ingredients and the labor-intensive production process made it very expensive. During the economic boom, it was a massive hit in its first year. Unfortunately, the collapse of the economic boom brought a sudden downturn, and spending on luxury items like sake became a low priority. Silver Summit had to cease production after only a few years. Since then, Irwin Distillery has focused on producing affordable yet delicious sake, maintaining a modest operation to this day. However, they no longer have the resources to reintroduce a high-end sake. Seeing both Rachel and Claude's disappointed expressions, I puffed out my chest. That's why I organized this event. They both looked at me, eyes wide with curiosity. The local sake. I'm confident it can stand up to anything, anywhere. Not just here or across Japan but internationally as well. If we market it to people overseas, it's bound to become a hit. And if sales increase, reviving Silver Summit won't just be a dream. As I passionately explained, Claude's eyes lit up, and Rachel looked stunned. You've thought about this much? I nodded firmly. I refuse to live in a world where I can't drink that sake again. When I grinned, Rachel smiled warmly, clearly moved. Claude and I promised to meet again at tomorrow's tasting event, and I led Rachel to greet other acquaintances. Every representative from the breweries was in high spirits, and the only one who needed my support was Rachel. With every introduction, Rachel seemed both flustered and impressed, her eyes darting back and forth. When the reception party wrapped up, and I stepped outside after helping with cleanup, I saw Rachel in her kimono, arms crossed, waiting for me. Good work. What's going on? I asked, confused, and she puffed out her cheeks. What's going on? That's what I want to ask you. What are you, Ryan? It's not just French, you speak English, Italian, German, and some other languages I can't even remember. How are you fluent in so many languages? With a flurry of hand gestures and a flustered expression, she bombarded me with questions, looking surprisingly adorable. I tried my best to keep my amusement from showing on my face. I told you, didn't I? When I was a kid living in Europe, I had no choice but to learn the local languages. Japanese, English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and finally, during my time in Switzerland, I even picked up Romansh. A language spoken by very few, driven by my growing interest in languages. Rachel was still visibly excited. And not just that. Oxford University? Really, you went to such a prestigious school? And then you joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Why are you now working for a small liquor wholesaler? She had been quietly listening, her eyes wide, while I chatted with old friends during the party. Although she seemed impressed, she hadn't asked about my background until now. She had happily talked about Irwin Brewery, the nuances of sake tasting, and laughed freely at jokes between me and my old friends. But now, all her pent-up curiosity about my past was spilling out. Are you really curious about someone like me? When I asked, Rachel nodded so quickly it was almost instant. Her reaction made me laugh again. All right. It's getting late, and we have an early morning tomorrow, but should we go to the hotel bar for a bit? When I suggested the bar on the top floor, Rachel nodded quietly, and the two of us stepped into the elevator. To prepare for tomorrow, we ordered drinks with low alcohol content and raised a toast. Then, I briefly shared my background with Rachel. My childhood in Europe, which I had grown so accustomed to, came to an abrupt end when I was 13. My parents' jobs brought us back to Japan. They were overjoyed to return to their homeland, but the thought of moving yet again weighed heavily on me. The last place I lived was Switzerland, but it was close to Germany and France, where I had lived before. So I could visit old friends during holidays. Moving to Japan meant leaving that familiar region far, far behind. And because the move was decided so suddenly, I couldn't even say proper goodbyes. Determined to return to Europe someday, I threw myself into my studies. My goal was to attend a European university. I initially thought about studying in Switzerland, where I had lived last. But my best friend Claude encouraged me to aim for Oxford University with him. Claude was exceptionally intelligent, and the way he so casually suggested Oxford surprised me. But his suggestion lit a fire within me. I wanted to attend the same school as him. I wanted to experience the world-class education of one of the best universities in the world. I studied relentlessly and eventually secured admission to Oxford. Of course, Claude was also accepted, and my time at Oxford became one of the most fulfilling periods of my life. I made many friends beyond Claude and landed a job at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which seemed like an ideal career. But after some time, doubts began to creep in. Was this really the right job for me? I couldn't shake the feeling that both my university choice and career had been decisions I made simply because they were recommended to me. While my time at university was undeniably one of the most valuable and fulfilling experiences of my life, choosing that path felt like the best decision I ever made. As for my career, I chose the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because I could speak 7 languages and wanted to work in a field that connects Japan with the rest of the world. However, in hindsight, it feels like I went along with what was recommended to me. Even though the work was meaningful and fulfilling on the surface, something felt off. That uneasiness lingered within me, smoldering quietly. Then, Silver Summit shattered those doubts with a single sip. The moment I tasted it, I knew. I want to work in a field that connects Japan with the rest of the world. But exactly how? I had struggled to answer that question for so long. When I tasted Silver Summit, the answer became clear. I wanted to share this sake with the world. So, I left the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and joined my current liquor wholesaler. When I finished my story, Rachel's eyes were wide with astonishment. The turning point in your life was my grandfather's alcohol? She asked, stunned, and I nodded quietly. I felt like it was the only thing I could do. Actually, I even reached out to Irwin Brewery to see if they would hire me. But they turned me down, saying they didn't need more staff. As I said this, I glanced at Rachel. She had been the one to respond so apologetically to my inquiry, but it seemed she didn't remember. However, wait. Could it be about 3 years ago? That guy in a suit who showed up out of nowhere asking for a job even though we weren't hiring? To my surprise, she remembered. Well, yeah, of course I do. No one else ever showed up asking to be hired when there weren't even job postings. Her reply made me slump a little in embarrassment. Yeah, makes sense. And when I finally got hired at my current company and came to introduce myself to Irwin Brewery, you didn't seem to recognize me at all, I said with a wry smile, and Rachel's face turned red. Oh, I see. So that guy in the suit asking us to hire him was you, Ryan. Sorry, I didn't connect the dots. Well, considering I had barely been given a glance before being turned away, it wasn't surprising. Even though I was completely overlooked back then. I've finally made it this far, I said, biting my lip. Although I managed to get involved in the sales of local sake, every proposal to expand our market internationally was consistently and flatly rejected. No matter how much I emphasized the growing global interest in Japanese sake, the stubborn current president, Mr. Mason, dismissed it outright, insisting only Japanese can truly appreciate the taste of Japanese sake, refusing to even hear me out. So, I shifted my focus to the vice president, Mason's son. I pitched my ideas to him, shared my background, and highlighted the connections I had built during my time living in Europe, studying at Oxford University, and working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Finally, I managed to secure approval for tomorrow's large-scale tasting event. It's all for the revival of Silver Summit. Honestly, it's completely personal. Of course, I also hope this will help bring attention to and elevate all the incredible, high-quality sake from our local distilleries. At its core, though, my main goal is to contribute to the comeback of Silver Summit. With sufficient funding, and given the current global Japanese sake boom and rising domestic demand for quality spirits, I'm convinced this won't be a losing battle. Rachel swirled her cocktail glass gently. I'm happy, knowing someone with such passion has been supporting our brewery all this time. Her lips, slightly flushed from the alcohol, moved in a way that was almost mesmerizing. Watching her made my heart race. Maybe that's why I was drawn to you, she murmured, her words abstract and fleeting, and my heart skipped a beat. Rachel slowly looked at me, her gaze lingering. For what felt like 5 full seconds, we stared at each other in silence. I broke it first. For Silver Summit, and to be honest, for you, Rachel. I've always been doing this for you. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. If tomorrow's event is a success, would you let me help bring Silver Summit back? As your partner. Her lips trembled slightly. Do you mean? I scratched my head awkwardly. This is too roundabout, isn't it? Not very manly. Rachel, I like you. Will you go out with me? I blurted out my feelings directly, heart pounding. To be honest, I only did so because I thought I had a chance. Rachel's earlier murmur about being drawn to someone had given me the push I needed, convincing me she was talking about me. However, I'm sorry. I make it a rule not to develop romantic feelings for business partners. My jaw dropped in shock. What? But earlier you said you were drawn to me. I muttered pitifully, and Rachel's face turned red. That's because I meant you're someone who naturally draws people in. You've been such a great support, even making someone like me, who's terrible at parties, want to participate. It's that kind of attraction. In other words, it wasn't romantic at all. I'd been rejected in record time. I drained the rest of my drink in one gulp. I wanted to drown my sorrows in alcohol, but with tomorrow's event, I couldn't afford to get drunk. As I stared at my empty glass with a heavy heart, Rachel chuckled softly. But maybe I'll start seeing you that way from now on. Her unexpected words made me snap my head up to look at her. Rachel shyly covered her face with her hands. Don't stare at me like that. If I think about it too much, I might start feeling flustered. Inside, I did a triumphant fist pump, silently cheering. I wasn't ready to give up yet. A faint glimmer of hope flickered in the distance, keeping me moving forward. Then now, after more than 10 years, Rachel and I stood together in the brewery, surrounded by the staff, all holding their breath in anticipation. We poured the radiant liquid into our tiny cups, its brilliance catching the light, and exchanged a glance. When I gave her a silent nod, Rachel lifted the cup with both hands and brought it to her lips. She sipped, savored the taste, and swallowed slowly before her face melted into an expression of pure bliss. Seeing her reaction, I followed suit, bringing the cup to my lips. As the liquid flowed over my tongue, tears welled up and spilled over. The sake was incredibly smooth. A pleasant acidity greeted me first, followed by a rich, velvety sweetness that spread throughout my mouth, leaving a warm sense of happiness even as I swallowed. When Claude and I had tasted the aged Silver Summit years ago, the sweetness came first, followed by notes of acidity and bitterness. But this newly crafted Silver Summit introduced the acidity up front, evolving into a mellow sweetness that lingered. I had never tasted Silver Summit freshly brewed 30 years ago. But I was certain that this is Silver Summit. My heart trembled with emotion. We need to invite Claude, I said through my tears, and Rachel nodded with a radiant smile. The day after my heartfelt confession had ended in rejection, the tasting event was a resounding success. Thanks to meticulous planning and widespread promotion, the hotel venue was packed with locals and tourists alike. Every brewery's booth saw a steady stream of visitors, but Irwin Brewery's booth was especially crowded. Recently, Irwin Distillery has focused on producing affordable and accessible Japanese sake. However, for this event, they prepared a special new batch. While they couldn't craft a premium small batch sake due to time constraints in sourcing the ideal grains, they used their current flagship 60% mash bill. By adjusting the flavor profile, they created a smoother, more approachable sake with a clean finish, prioritizing balance over sweetness. This approach earned high praise. Through interpreters, I expressed our ambition to create something even greater, sake that could earn the title of a legendary brew. Many international buyers offered their cooperation. Large orders were secured, and Irwin Brewery suddenly found itself bustling with activity. The once idle tanks had to be reactivated, and with the ample funds now available, the brewery took its first steps toward reviving Silver Summit. I helped in every way I could. Around that time, I also managed to win Rachel's heart. When she embraced me and said, "I can't imagine life without you, Ryan," it was a moment of pure fulfillment. A year later, we were married. After more than a decade of effort, we finally succeeded in reviving Silver Summit. We had previously produced sake with a 20% polishing ratio. And though it was expensive, it sold out immediately. However, something felt incomplete. Rachel and I agreed not to call it Silver Summit. It was missing something. Even though I'd never tasted the original Silver Summit fresh, I couldn't help but wonder, would this sake, after 30 years, achieve that legendary flavor? Rachel had questioned why we couldn't just be satisfied with such a delicious brew. I almost gave in to her reasoning. But someone agreed with me. It was Rachel's grandfather. He had retired just a few years after Silver Summit's production had ceased. Through trial and error, he had developed and perfected the original Silver Summit and remembered its freshly brewed taste. Trusting both my instincts and his palate, I persevered. This is Silver Summit. When I smiled at her, Rachel nodded slowly. Now I understand why you couldn't settle for anything less. This is on a completely different level. I wish Grandpa could taste it too. Her grandfather was currently hospitalized and prohibited from drinking alcohol. Do you think knowing Silver Summit has been revived might give him some strength? With my words, Rachel chuckled softly. I think so. He might even try to escape the hospital to come celebrate. I hoped he would recover and live a long, healthy life. After all, sake truly is the elixir of life. I hoped those words would become a reality someday. Our kids, they're still in elementary school now, but I'd love for them to try this when they turn 20. I said, thinking about the future and imagining our children, who were probably hard at work and school at that moment. Yes, we'll have to make sure Silver Summit doesn't disappear after just a few years again. We need to sell it properly this time, Rachel declared, rolling up her sleeves with determination. We shared the newly completed Silver Summit with everyone at the brewery. Seeing their joyful, contented expressions filled both Rachel and me with happiness. I wanted as many people as possible to experience the profound sense of fulfillment that one cup of sake could bring. With that thought in my heart, I watched everyone's smiling faces, feeling deeply connected to this shared moment of joy.